Welcome to University of Hoops, the show that gives you an inside look at the people making everything happen on your favorite basketball team. Today, we are very excited to welcome Houston Rockets advanced scout Zuri Williams. Zuri, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, appreciate to be here.
Absolutely, man. We're super pumped to sort of, tell your story and get to know you more. And speaking of which, I want to start with what you're up to these days, on the scouting side. And I think people, especially NBA fans, like may not know that there are different kinds of scouting. So to start off, can you explain to our listeners what exactly an advanced scout is and why you think it's such an important position to the rest of the coaching staff?
All right, no problem. And actually, you're absolutely right because most people don't know what an advanced scout is. They assume that I scout players. That's the normal assumption when you say scout. So an advanced scout is I scout the teams before we play them. So I'm always about a week ahead of whoever we're going to play on the schedule. I'm looking at what they do offensively, defensively, but mostly to to help our team be prepared for that game.
Specifically speaking, what does your day-to-day look like in sort of making that happen?
So before I get to an arena to scout a team, there's prep work that goes in. That means you watch videos on that team that you're scouting. You go over their plays. You're looking at their playbook. You're going over their plays to see what they're called, um, the little nuances of it, so that once you get to the arena, you're better prepared. It's like taking a test every day. You don't want to take a test without studying for it. So, I mean, you can, you won't get good grades, but you want to be prepared to take that test. So it's the same thing.
What's sort of like the somebody like yourself, like you played, and we'll get into that more here in just a second, but what's sort of that learning process like when you're starting out as a scout, kind of just learning like what it is that you need to do and what it is that you need to know about the NBA game? Because of course the NBA too, the speed of the game is crazy compared to any other level. It's the highest level in the world, obviously. So what is that like, kind of like when you're learning sort of the trade of being an advanced scout, when you're watching film, like what are the things that you look for and how did you learn sort of that, like, okay, these are the things that I need to look for specifically?
Well, it really gets broken down from team to team. Every team has a certain thing something different that you look for. You know, every team doesn't have a coach who calls the plays. It might be the point guard. It depends on what point guard is in the game. If that point guard is pretty knowledgeable, the coach sometimes will let him make the call. So if I know that, then I'm watching this point guard. If there's an unexperienced point guard in the game, then there's more times than likely that the coach is going to be making those calls. Um, the hardest part of learning this job is, I was a player before, um, but the NBA has different terminology. So learning the terminology was tough. The speed of the game in the beginning was very fast for me. So, you put your head down for 1 second, that play's already started. They already made a call. So, just being tuned in, knowing when to be tuned in, um, these are the things that I had to learn. Um, I actually, when I first started, got pretty much thrown into the fire. I had never done this job before, didn't really know exactly what was entailed. I mean, they told me, but I really didn't know. So my first 3 months was pretty tough, watching games, not really knowing exactly what to be watching for with certain teams. The first 3 months was long nights.
Yeah, I can imagine, and it's so crazy hearing you say that because you have a long career as a player and you know the game better than a lot of people who would do it who didn't play at a high level overseas at the D1 college level. So to hear you say that, like
Right.
it's like I think it really puts it it does it really puts it into perspective, like how good these guys are at the NBA level and the attention to detail that goes into
Uh,
preparing for a regular season game, let alone the teams that, are in the playoffs. And then as you get to the deeper in the playoffs and the preparation just changes even more. Um,
definitely.
I gotta ask you before we move on,
Uh,
now that you've been doing the scouting thing for a little bit, who are some of the best guys, players that you've scouted, on other teams that just kind of like, you know, take your breath away and you're like, wow, like this guy, from a scouting perspective, you know what I mean? Like who are some of those guys?
no, that's a good question. So, for example, I got a chance to watch one of those people last night. I scouted New York against Dallas. Kyrie Irving is one of the best space creators on the court. His ability to be able to dribble between crowded spaces, which to the naked eye you would be like, there's no way you can get through there. But he's able to maneuver himself, and his body control once he jumps in the air. He's not the biggest guy, but he's solid. So his ability to turn and create angles that the normal person can't create, um, is pretty remarkable. Sometimes it's funny. Sometimes when I watch him, I get stuck watching him instead of doing my job. Um, I shouldn't be saying that, but it's the truth. And there's a few players who sometimes you just like, whoa, he just did that. And he's one of them.
Yeah, makes sense. And I've heard stories about even when Kyrie was growing up, dribbling in his garage with bags over the basketballs and
Uh,
things like the dude. You can just tell, and even if you watch him warm up at before games, like his skill level, his like ability, like you said, to dribble through traffic and do all these crazy kinds of finishes with either hand. It's just like unlike anything the game has ever seen. He's just super talented. So
exactly.
yeah, so super super interesting to hear your perspective on that as a scout. Um, we touched on a little bit, that you played, and
Mhm.
I'd like to kind of go into that now, if you don't mind, and just kind
Sure.
of take the audience through your journey, as a player, where you started, how long you played for, the different places that the game, took you to before you became a scout.
Okay. So I actually started in elementary school, but um, on accident, I guess you could say. I went to a game from my friend. Um, they didn't have enough players. So the coach asked me if I could play. And I had told him, I said, I watched it on TV, but I never played the game myself. And it's funny, the first tip, I actually scored a layup in the wrong basket because I didn't really understand the rules. It was the basket close to me. So I was like, hey, let me get this layup. Um, Quickly found out that that was the wrong basket. But at the end of that game, I played pretty well. I had 18 points. So the coach took me home and asked my parents about if he could be my coach. And then from there, this was what, the sixth, seventh grade, I think that happened. Um, and we had moved from New York to Oakland at this time. So when this happened was in Oakland. I never played in New York. Um, and then I ended up going to a school called Bishop O'Dowd High School in Oakland. And that's where it really changed. So when I got there, I started to realize like the competition level was tough. And in order to compete, I mean, you got to put the work in. And I was always like a grinder like that. I think that's why, I don't mind doing this job because if you got to work hard and grind to do something, I'm all in. I like it. Um, so as a freshman, I'm playing against our seniors, juniors, uh, older classmen, and I was always competing with them. And I would, tell them about it. Like, yo, you letting this young dude, get you in the court. You should be ashamed of yourself. And I just kept putting the work in, and eventually I got a scholarship. Got, went on some recruiting visits, and ended up getting a scholarship. Played at UCI. That was actually the turning point because I met uh, a guy by the name of Scott Brooks. Um, I was a freshman, 18. I was in a program called Summer Bridge. I forget who he was playing with. It was either the Philadelphia 76ers or the Minnesota Timberwolves at that time, but we were playing open gym. And then after the game, one of the professors asked me, like, hey, you know who you just played against? I was like, nah. I said, but you know that blah, blah, blah could shoot. And he was like, he heard me say that. So then at that point, he invited me to work out with him every day. In the summertime, we would do like two a day, sometimes three a days. And he really instilled into me, like, you know, you can be on this level if you work hard. And he basically gave me like a blueprint of how to work, what I needed to work on, my weaknesses, what need to get better. And then 2 weeks before graduating college, I broke my left foot, had to have surgery, still got the plate in there with 9 screws. So I basically had to take that year off. That was my first year actually having a real job. I worked for a mortgage banker. But as I worked for them, I would work out before going to work. The boss of this company would let me hit the weights at lunchtime. And then after work, I would go and work some more, get some open gym in and get some shots in. So even though I was technically away from the game, I wasn't away for the game. And I always had a goal in my mind, like, I'm going to get back on the court. Eventually got a call from Germany to go play there. The season had already started. I think it was a city called Dortmund. And they were 1-4, 1-5, something like that. And they brought me in to try me out. And the point guard from them was still there. It was an American. I forget where he was from, but he was still there. We had practice. After that practice, they were like, well, basically, we want you, Zuri, and we're going to get rid of him. That's how cutthroat it is over there. And then we ended up winning 9 games in a row. They ended up signing me for the next season, and then we won the league. And then, just started playing in different countries from there.
Yo, let it be known, Zuri Williams, certified bucket getter. That's what
I
I'm
can't.
that's what I'm hearing right now, man. Zuri Williams, certified bucket getter, talking trash to the upperclassmen in high school. Scott Brooks is like, yo, who's that? Taking the overseas dude's job. Like, damn, man, that's impressive, man. That's crazy.
I appreciate you, but you know what? To get buckets, I really didn't learn on how to get buckets until I got to overseas. I was always a traditional point guard, the facilitator. I scored when I had to, but that was my role. But what I found out in Europe is that if you don't get certain numbers, they'll get rid of you.
Wow.
And it's really that simple. I mean, you have to know what your role with that team, and at that time, you could only have like 1 or 2 Americans on the team. So, if you only could have 1 or 2, then they expected you to score to a certain degree as well, unless that team was loaded with other scores, which most of the time it wasn't. So that's when I really learned how to score.
Got you. Got you.
Yeah.
That's super. It's just so interesting to hear, the differences between American basketball and overseas basketball. And I think that like the thing about the pros that you hear all the time is that like when you get to that level, especially overseas, it's like, guys are competing like to put food on their table for their family. You know what I mean? So it's like it's so cutthroat is what you always hear. But to hear from you as somebody that was there to be like, nah, like if you don't have these numbers, like they're getting rid of you. That's crazy. That's
Simple as
like a
that.
different level of cutthroat. And it's fascinating to see just sort of the takeover that we're seeing in the NBA now of all these overseas players. I mean, the guy I think of all the time off the bat is Luca. Just because you had the tape. Everybody had the tape. This dude was a little kid, like killing people. And some people were still like doubting like whether or not he was gonna like his game was gonna translate. And I'm like, guys, like basketball is basketball. Like the things he was doing to people over there was just as a kid was crazy.
Yeah, and the thing that people overlook with Luca is, here in the NBA or in the States in general, we put a lot with athleticism, um, and like that kind of potential. But Luca's always been skilled. And Luca was playing with grown men, meaning like 30-year-olds, like the people who got cut from NBA teams or have been playing overseas. He was playing against these guys at like 14. So he's ahead of the curve. At 18, he's like, and yeah, you played here. So I done been here before. I could do this. So what he's doing, we really haven't seen because he has the ability to make you play at his speed. He's always comfortable. You could throw two or three people at him, take the ball out of his hands, what a lot of teams like to do. But he's just so skilled, he's still going to have a major impact on the game.
As a former overseas player, when you're scouting guys, like do you see can you see traits in players like Luca or whoever else, like a Alperen Sengun, on the Houston
Mhm.
Rockets, like, can you see traits in some players who are like, oh, like that's something that's something in their game that they probably picked up over there. Like, do you see that as a former overseas guy?
I couldn't say like that's like a part of their game that they picked up over there, but what I can say is that when you see certain players, like, oh, that's different. That's different, meaning like special. Like, not everybody can do that. Um, and I can't say like this country does it better than this or anything like that, but seeing certain players, you just know like they got a they got a different way about them. That's different.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Um, what sort of from your time as an overseas, professional player, how do you think that helps you in your job now, scouting NBA guys?
Um, well, for one, when you play overseas, you're really by yourself. Uh, this job that I do, I'm always on the road by myself. Um, you know, while I was overseas, my only connection with being back home was talking on the phone to my friends or family, watching a college or NBA game on TV. Uh, so you you're always alone, and doing this job, that you have a lot of one-on-one time. So you know, got to be organized to make your day be functional. At least that's how I move. So um, yeah,
Got it. What about scouting teams? Because I know we've talked about players, but kind of go in if you don't mind to what it's
yeah,
like scouting the teams.
right. Well, that's basically what I do. I don't scout players; I scout teams. So when I'm watching teams, I'm basically looking at the plays that they call, verbals, visuals, the little nuances. What they like to call after timeouts. If they get a bucket or score a bucket on one play, if they go back to that play, um, what kind of mismatches they're looking for. Um, because of the team that they have, what kind of mismatches or lineups do we have to use to play against this? Um, if you know they score well off one play, how do we take away their first option from that or slow that up? Looking at all of these little things.
Got you. And I mean, you talked a lot about, the nuances that are there with teams. How important is getting those nuances down? And how do you think that that can then be used effectively, on the coaching staff when they then when the Rockets play those teams?
Well, it goes back to just being prepared. I mean, the better you're prepared for anything, the more success you're going to have. So if you know a team's nuances, how they like to move, if you know that beforehand, then you should be better at it when you're ready to perform in a perfect world. Um, but, that's what that really comes down to, is, and it goes to anything, when you have an interview, the more you're prepared of the questions that they're going to ask, the better you're going to answer them because you've already went over them. You've studied it, so it should be like second nature by the time that interview comes. And that's basically how you approach games. When that situation comes, you've been there, you've talked about it, you've practiced it. It should be second nature by that time.
One of the things that I asked you, earlier in the show, we were talking more about the players, some of the players that sort of stand out to you. And you mentioned, Kyrie. What about on the
Mhm.
coaching side? And you mentioned, looking at like ATOs, like who are some of the best ATO coaches in the league from your perspective? And who are some of the coaches that stand out for you?
Spolstra from Miami is a great ATO play caller. Um, in my opinion, the best that I've seen since I've been in the league, he's no longer a coach though, is Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens, who used to coach the Celtics, he was like in a way, like a Rain Man type of a guy, because you could see him at timeouts and he'd just be going over his clipboard and almost kind of like mumbling to himself. And then the next thing you know, he's coming out with a play after a timeout. You're like, wow, he just put that together. That's a great call right there. Um, Body movement, action, always. So those two for sure. Um, who else would be a good ATO? Pop is good at ATOs. Um, One of the hardest coaches to scout because they have just different terminology and just certain sets is Quinn Snyder from Atlanta. Um, he's tough. Um, Carlisle is good as well. Although the thing that I like about Carlisle, when I first came into the league, Carlisle ran teams a certain way. But now, you know, because of the talent that he has, he's adapted to his talent and he calls things differently and also not as much. Um, that's impressive from a coach to have that ability to do that, to change their way of coaching and thinking for the betterment of the team that they're working with. Not every coach does that.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective about that. I think it's super insightful to basketball fans, people that are into the X's and O's, or anybody that follows the league. Like that's like super intriguing stuff. I just want to take a moment and give you your flowers, Zuri, because I think your job is so valuable. You're the first guy that's seen the teams that that your team is going to play. So I just want to sort of say it and make sure that people understand that watch this, like how valuable that job is. Um, and I think that, like whether you're on the coaching staff or you're a scout, what I hope that people take away from listening to our conversation is just how detail oriented all of this stuff is. And it's not as simple as like, I have the best athletes in the world, or I have 3 stars and then role players. And it's not just about that. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes to make the well-oiled machine what it is. And the Rockets have been like a really good, I think, nice surprise for a lot of people. They've taken that next step with your young guys, and of course bringing in Dylan and Fred into the mix. So it
Hey,
showed.
Freddie.
Yeah, yeah, man. And I really identify with him just in terms of being like an underdog and proving people wrong and whatever. And I think he's what he did as an undrafted guy signing the contract that he signed is just incredible. So
No question. And the one of the good things about I was just about to say about Steady Freddie, about Fred on the court. Um, he brings a calmness to the team. Um, he brings also a guy who's been there, done it. His whether he scores 30 and has 20 assists, or whether he has 2 points and 5 turnovers, his demeanor will always be the same. And that calmness at the point guard, that leadership, that goes a long way.
got it. Yeah. Again, super valuable, I think, to hear your perspective about that. And
Thank you for the flowers as well.
of
So,
course, hey, of course, man. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with this show is like, you know, whether you're like a casual basketball fan or you're really into it and you're into the X's and O's or whatever, there are just parts of the business that people just like don't even know, that all these other paths that you can take. You know what I mean? It's not just like being in media or being a coach or a GM. Like there's scouting and what you do. So I think that's what we're trying to do on the show, is just give people insight into how all this stuff works. And hopefully, there's somebody out there that is going to watch this and be like, oh, that could be cool. And maybe they'll start going down that path. So,
yeah,
appreciate your willingness to share.
no problem. And what you just touched on is what I speak to at my high school about. I every year when I have to go scout the Warriors of Sacramento, I always stop in at my high school. And me and my history teacher, we're still close. So whenever I go back to high school, he always has me speak to the class. And that's one of the things that he always wants me to tell them, like, you don't have to be that NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA player. There's so many other avenues to be able to get into those industries. There's so many opportunities out there. And most people don't know about these opportunities until they're told about it. Not to say that people can't do their research, but you get more insight once somebody lets you know these things. So I'm all about that.
That's amazing, man. That's amazing. And you touched on your high school again, so I do want to just quickly bring up. I remember when I was younger, there's a guy named Ivan Rabb who played on Bishop O'Dowd, and I just remember watching him in the state championship game and being like, this dude, like Bishop O'Dowd, man, like that's NorCal, like that's one of those programs, just like in SoCal, teams like Mater Day and now more so teams like the Sierra Canyons of the world and whatever,
Right.
and the new age of high school basketball we're in, where we have all these dudes who you played with and came up with. Now their kids are going to like all these schools, and it's just it's
Yeah.
nuts. But yeah, I just wanted to bring up Ivan Rabb's name just because like he's one of the best high school players I can remember watching when I was
He
little.
was a great player. Actually, his coach, Lou Ritchie, was my teammate in high school. I was a freshman and he was a junior. Um, Ivan Rapp, a lot of people don't know about him. He was tough. A lot of people don't know that he went to Cal and played with Jalen Brown. They had a really good team. Um, he was really tough in high school. Yeah. But yeah, O'Dowd was always like one of the toughest schools in Northern California. In my time, the other tough school was a school by the name of St. Joe's, where Jason Kidd went. Um, when J Kidd was there, they were very relevant. He made them relevant. Um, People don't know how good J Kidd. Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of people do, but when he was in high school, he was doing the same things he was doing in the NBA.
Man, it's so crazy because, like, so you grow up. I don't care if you're like me, you're 5'8" and you can't jump and you shoot and like whatever, or you have athleticism and you're 6'5", or like I just, especially growing up, I feel really fortunate growing up like in Southern California because it's such a hotbed. And then even in watching the state championship games and seeing the talent from NorCal, when you see those guys that are at that other level, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And it's just like you bring up a guy like Jason Kidd, like I can't even imagine what it was like to watch him play when he was in
Oh man,
high school.
like you just mentioned, there's different levels to this game, no question. Um, I remember watching J.R. Ryder as a freshman and thinking like, whoa, I don't know what an NBA guy looks like in person, but I'm assuming he looks like that right there, J.R. Ryder, because some of the things he was doing was just like, I've never seen that before. There's one play I remember in high school. We had a center, got the ball, did a jump hook. JR basically jumped vertical, got it off the glass, brought it down, kicked it ahead to his brother. His brother's running the fast break. His brother kicks it back to him. JR catches it, touches his foot with it, and then dunks it. I'm what, 14, 15 at this time? I had never seen something like that, especially in a game. That was like a dunk contest dunk, but this is in the game. Um, and for all those people who don't know, J.R. Ryder won the slam dunk contest in the NBA before as well. Um, you know, do your research on him. He was an animal.
I'll bring up what Shaq says. Google me. Like,
Yeah.
it's not hard. Like, just look it up, man. Um, you've been super gracious in talking about teams and players and other guys. I want to get more into your journey now, though. Again,
Okay.
and just kind of let you tell the people how you got into the NBA. On the coaching slash scouting side. I know you brought up Scott Brooks, and I know you have some connections, to the Washington Wizards. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of telling people how you got that first opportunity and sort of the journey to where you are now with the Rockets.
So I was playing overseas. I played overseas for 20 years. And then my last 2, 3 years I was coaching. And I used to always go to a what was it called? Kutcher Sports Academy. It was like a camp for kids who were serious about sports. And this was in upstate New York. You would play other camps from, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. We had a game against one school up in Massachusetts, and this guy had on a Washington Wizards shirt. And to wear a Washington Wizards shirt in Massachusetts is, that's not right. So I was like, well, are you from DC? And he was like, no, I know the GM there. And I'm like, oh, okay. I was like, because, normally to wear that around these parts, I'm sure people who are Celtics fans are looking at you a little weird. So after that conversation, I texted Scott because at that time Scott was the the head coach for Washington. Um, that led into him 2 or 3 days later offering me the advanced job for Washington. Um, I had never done it. Again, I didn't know exactly what that meant. But once he gave me the opportunity, I was like, well, I'm all in, coach. So that's actually how I got to the NBA. I worked 4 years for him while he was a coach in Washington. When he got let go, um, I basically got let go. That's how that moves. Like if your coach hires you, then when they bring a new coach in, that new coach is normally going to bring his own people in. So that happened. And I was actually, I had to move out of my apartment in DC. Um, and my friend, who's where I'm at right now in Dallas, was like, hey, if you don't have a spot, man, just come stay here for that time until you figure it out. On my way here from driving from there, I get a call from a friend of mine from Orlando at the time. He's like, hey, uh, Houston is looking for somebody. And I mentioned you. And I'm like, okay, cool. Later in this drive, I'm like in Arkansas at the moment driving. Um, I get a call from the coach. We're having like an interview, and I'm on the way to Dallas. Um, we had a lot of similarities. He was telling me like, hey, my first job was an advanced job for Washington as well. I'm speaking about Stephen Silas at the moment. So he eventually gives me that job, but I got that job because of the recommendation that I had from a guy who worked for Stephen. He wasn't at advanced at that time, but he referred me to Stephen Silas, and then Stephen eventually hired me. So that's how I got to Houston. Um, I actually was let go once Stephen left, or after they got rid of him. Um, and then eventually, the GM and the coaches called me and brought me back. So um, I said all that to say, like, it hasn't always been like a smooth street. There's always little challenges and obstacles that come in between. But to get in this industry, you normally have to know somebody. But to stay in this industry, you have to do good work. Um, and I would like to think that's why I'm still here, is that my work is okay. Um, if my name is on it, then I'm not turning in bad work because my name is on it. So um, here we are, still today with the Rockets.
Hey man, that's real. That's awesome. Awesome advice. Thanks for sharing your journey there. What's it been like for you with the Rockets? What's your experience been like in the organization?
It's been a good one. You know, with every coaching staff wants their work a little differently. So just been learning the adjustments and how they want it, and just trying to, coordinate and make it happen in that fashion.
Absolutely. Makes sense. Um, I kind of want to get in now to sort of, there are a lot of people out there, whether they're like former players or they're not, that want to work in the NBA in some
Mhm.
capacity. Some people know they want to be on the coaching side or the scouting side. Some people don't. Um, what's your best advice just in general for people out there that are trying to get into this?
Um, be around as much as possible. Don't let anybody tell you what you can't do. If you really feel like you can do it, do something every day to get closer to what you want to achieve. Um, I mean, it's a hard journey. I mean, for that right there, I would have to thank also a friend of mine's. His name is Charles Clay, because I used to always come back from overseas, and we'd always hang out in the summer times. And he knows the people I know, or in the NBA at that time. And he would tell me, man, he was like, it was during the summer league. He was like, man, you should just go out to summer league just to see who you could see and have conversations. And then that's actually where the Scott situation started again, because I saw his assistant coaches, they knew how close Scott and I was. Um, And then the following years, when I saw the guy wearing the shirt, the Washington Wizards shirt, and then that's when he called me and offered me the job. So um, just stay involved, keep talking to people. You know, when there's an opportunity, if people, if you are relevant to people, they're more times than not going to give you an opportunity because you're relevant to them. You know, if they haven't seen you for a while or haven't talked to you for a while, it's harder for them to remember you at these times when opportunities come. So I would just say stay relevant, always be around the game. Um, you might have to step out of your comfort zone. You might have to go somewhere that you normally wouldn't go, but you're investing in yourself to go. So if you really want something, you'll find a way of achieving it. It might not be from one night to the next, but if you really want something, you can make it happen.
It's a great message, man. Appreciate that. Last thing I want to ask you, and we ask all of our guests this here on the show, is what's your why, would you say?
Why I do this job, or what do you mean?
Yeah, yeah. Like why, what's the reason why? And it can even be a deeper answer in terms of why you're part of basketball in general, what the game has helped you with in your life. Like just what's your why behind what you do?
Um, my why, I guess, would be I always wanted to be a NBA player growing up. Once I fell in love with the sport. Um, and I couldn't do that. So to be able to have a job in an industry that I would I would play for free. I would watch basketball for free. And I have a job that they pay me to do these things. Um, I'm fully aware that, there's a lot of people, and most people in this world, they have jobs that they do because they have to. They got to pay their mortgage, pay their rent, they got mouths to feed. Um, I'm very blessed and fortunate that I'm able to do something that I love, something that I have a passion for, and I get reimbursed for that. Um, you know, I was fortunate to also be able to play basketball overseas and be reimbursed for that. Um, my why is I just want to keep challenging myself, keep stepping out of my comfort zone, because when you step out of your comfort zone, that's how you learn. You learn about yourself. You learn what you need to do to be successful. There's not always a blueprint, so you got to figure that blueprint out. I love these challenges. My why is I want to keep learning. There's so much more I can learn, and it just drives me every day. Like, all right, let's get at it. Um, so I guess my why is I'm just really driven like that. I'm always looking for a challenge.
Zuri Williams of the Houston Rockets, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the show and telling your story today, Zuri.
I appreciate you guys letting me tell my story.
Absolutely. Anytime. And thank you to the viewers and the listeners for tagging along another week here on University of Hoops. We are the show that's taking you behind the scenes, behind the people that make everything happen on your favorite basketball team. And like I said, we're doing shows every week. So we had Zuri on this week. We'll have another guest for you next week. We appreciate you watching and listening. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, or X as it's called now, at Univ Hoops. That's at UNIV Hoops. I'm Blake Atwell, and we will see you next time.